Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast. I'm your host, Alexandra Stockwell. I'm a physician and an intimate marriage expert, and I specialize in showing couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships. I've been married for 25 years. My husband and I have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing relationship. If you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how now. Let's dive in. I'm really excited for this episode. Of course, last week, if you've heard it, it was more or less an introduction to Podcast 2.0 and the transition into the Intimate Marriage Podcast. Well, of course, I want to start all the juicy newness by inviting my husband, Rod Stockwell, back to the podcast. He was last year. I forget which episode number it is, but we'll link to it in the show notes. He was last year on the podcast when we celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary last March. Now it's October. Welcome back, sweetheart.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Really? What do you like about being here?
I like that I can be part of the action a little and also keep my introverted self observing most of the rest of the time.
Well, you're definitely part of the action. Without you, I wouldn't be getting action. And I mean that with all the definitions involved. And maybe that's a good segue, because one of the questions that I am asked, usually not in a public forum, although I'd certainly address it there, but it comes up with clients after we've been working together a little while and we've gone really deep and gotten to the essence of the patterns and the dynamic in their relationship. And there's a lot of love and trust established. And my client will turn to me and say, "You've been married for 25 years. How does it stay exciting?" I've been asked this by people who are hesitant to get engaged because they're concerned that things will end up just feeling flat and stale. I've been asked this question by people who've been in relationship for 5 years, for 10 years, and they want it to be different. They see with me it is different, but they don't really get, how is it possible 25 years together with the same person that things still feel exciting? There are new experiences. Things are dynamic and there's still spontaneity in all the right places. So, any response to that topic just right off the bat, Rod?
Well, it's definitely a worry. And so I could understand why someone would have that worry. And it really just does not fit with my actual experience if I relate to my actual life or the life of people that I know. I think as adults, it's easy to not focus on with kids, it's obvious that they're changing. I used to always be so frustrated because as soon as I got used to parenting them, they'd be in a different phase. And then I had to adjust myself as a parent to catch up with them. And I think it's easier to think.
Aren't I that way too?
That's true. You are that way too. I was definitely more aware of it with them, but I think that is my point, actually, that all people naturally change over time, even if their outward body doesn't grow in height a few inches every year. And I think it takes a lot of effort to try to stop the change. But the change arises naturally. And it's really a question of honoring it, going with it, not ignoring it, because the change seems to just arise naturally. So that's why I think it's almost a hypothetical worry as opposed to what I've actually noticed in reality with people or myself.
Okay, well, I think for anyone who's an entrepreneur, anyone who's a lifelong student, any physician who constantly needs to keep learning new things, any parent who makes a point of growing and evolving to meet their children where they are can really relate to what you're saying in terms of life lived. I mean, our whole society, our whole world has been constantly changing during our lifetime. And so just keeping up with that means we continue to grow and change. But what about in the bedroom? I have thought about this and am so grateful people have asked me about it and shared my honest response, which I will share here too. But what would you say? Like 25 years, same body. Is it boring with me?
See, I don't think it's the same body, and I don't think anything about it is the same. If I was going to a restaurant and I was trying to go to the same restaurant week after week and month after month, after a while, I may have really enjoyed it the first time or the first week, but after a while, it's going to be less appealing. Just naturally, my appetite changes. The sameness doesn't feel good. And so naturally, it's going to arise in me the desire to go to a different restaurant and try a new dish. And so I have new desires that arise. Maybe it's even the same exact bedroom, and you still have the same first and last name, and I still have the same first and last name. But what I want to do when we walk in the door is different. And so it's the desires and honoring what's arising in me and what's arising in you that makes it different and new and fresh.
Yeah, I really love that you say that. And I guess the thing to just be really overt and explicit about is that the culture of our marriage includes room for our desires. Like, I want to know what your desires are. And when you share them, whether it's sexually or any other aspect of life, I'm so interested. I'm curious. It's a way to get to know you and what's living in you. And there's no part of me that feels compelled to provide that for you just because it's your desire. Like, expressing a desire is different than expressing a request. Although honestly, I'm not really thinking of something that you desire that I flat out am a no to. But I think that's the consequence of my openness and my curiosity, not because I associate you having a desire with my responsibility to fulfill it.
And I think that there is a challenge because there's a certain safety, especially because a lot of people have or can have worries or hangups, especially about what happens in the bedroom. And so it's easier in a way to have a similar type experience as
like
the last time.
Sexual routine.
Yeah, a similar sexual routine. There's a routine that worked. It worked out okay for you. It worked out okay for me. And so it's easy to kind of go for that. It's like the easy win, but it winds up starting to have diminishing returns, like going to the same restaurant over and over again. But it still takes some courage to say on one particular day, to honor the fact that, you know what, I don't actually want to go to that same restaurant, and then take the risk to suggest, what if we just go to a different restaurant And maybe you've been thinking for the past 2 weeks, because you get sick of the restaurant before I do usually.
That's when it comes to food and sex.
For the past 2 weeks, you've been thinking, boy, when is he going to be ready to move on? But you didn't say anything. And so as soon as I bring it up, you're like, yes. But that still takes a little bit of courage to be an inner yes to the change that's arising in me and to suggest it.
Yeah. And in that, you and I were not born this way. We weren't raised to be this way. And we were not this way when we first got married 25 years ago. But we, again, within the culture of our marriage, have developed, each of us, prioritizing our experience over maintaining the status quo. I mean, this is really what I'm pointing to when I use the words uncompromising intimacy. And again, I did a recent podcast, which we can refer to in the show notes, on uncompromising intimacy. If that's not a familiar term, you also can read my book, which describes both what uncompromising intimacy is and exactly how to create that in a very straightforward, actionable, step-by-step way. And the reason that I could boil this down so simply is because of all of the research, exploration, risk-taking, and really honest feedback we've given one another while learning to be truly self-expressed and share our desires with one another without feeling constrained that it'll be inconvenient for the other person. And we can do that because of what I said earlier, which is that if one of us shares a desires, neither one of us assumes that the other one is bound to honor it. Although, again, that's what we want to be doing.
Well, and I think it has to do with facing a fear often. And I think I used to have more fears, I think, than you did. I've gotten better at facing my fears and not letting them win. And I just think if at the point the first few times it was much harder, and now it's become a habit and it's much easier, and they don't have the same power over me that they used to. But it really begins with not letting the fear win. And that is what leads to being willing to try something new.
So I know that you really got clear on this issue and made this shift a long time ago, and it's not really something that you put attention on. But I wonder, can you think of, like, if there's somebody listening who either themselves or their partner or both, honestly, is restricted by fears. And we're talking, I mean, even when you talk about having had fears and fear of expressing it, you're a Harvard graduate, you're a highly educated, highly functional, competent person in the world. So, like, one of the things that I love to do is really make it clear that high achievers, A+ students, highly successful entrepreneurs, and others, there also are fears there. And that's really what we're talking about. We're not talking about anything pathological. So, given all of that, can you think back? What are some of the steps that you took to overcome, to have the desire to share what you want be stronger than the fear of doing so?
Well, I think I could answer that two ways. The first way,
I want both.
The first way is that it's a natural process that however strong the fear is, the desires build and build and build until they're stronger than it. But it could take a long time if it has to happen that organic way. And sometimes it could be a rupture or more catastrophic or dramatic. And then the other way I would answer it is start small. In other words, if everything else is scary, In other words, if it's scary to have the light on, if it's scary to speak during sex, what if you start small and you have a candle that's on? Or maybe the candle is, in the other room and you leave the door open a crack. Like sometimes you have to just start small, but it's a victory against your fear. And then it leads to taking more steps in that direction.
I love those answers. And I want to contribute my part because, of course, if one person is overriding fear and expressing a desire, then there's somebody listening. And how that person listens is incredibly important for this to build momentum and really transform in the way that we've experienced it. And so whenever I teach about being curious or about asking your partner about their desires, I always emphasize that even if you don't like what they say, you need to be a yes to it if you want them to be sharing with you. So I can be a yes to the fact that you've opened up, even if I'm not so thrilled about what it is that you've actually told me. And honestly, I've never had a negative response to a desire you had, but I've had a negative response many, many, many times to how you've expressed that desire and not liked your tone of voice, not liked the language, just all kinds of things about the manner in which you said it. And I think one of the reasons that this is a transformation that's so far behind us is because of your priorities, your courage, your willingness to override the fear and speak what's true for you. And also very, very much because I learned to listen generously with genuine interest and to make it safe and not to let my critical bitchiness come out directly or even sideways. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say it from both sides. So as the one who's trying to express a desire or face down a fear and do something different than what the fear is trying to get me to do, it is super helpful to have my partner be excited and open and hearing it and appreciating that maybe that wasn't the easiest thing to ask. And so it came out a little weird or something, but to be on my team and supporting me. And the flip side is as the receiving person, which we've reversed roles on this at times, then I'm looking at the partner that I love and I can see that and feel that it's not working out that well, but I just have curiosity like, well, what do you really want? And when you can find it in yourself to tell me and express it, I want to be able to hear that and receive that part of you and have that part of you also be represented in our marriage.
Yeah. And I would say that a very practical application of everything we're saying is that I have learned to have my first response be some version of, thank you so much for telling me that. Whether you are telling me because you are introverted and don't tend to smear your emotions all over, it's more like, I'm like Oliver in the musical asking for more food, like, please, sir, may I have some more of your emotions, your thoughts, and your feelings, please, sir? And so I know that it's a big deal. Even though this is now not so scary, it's still a big deal. It's not your inclination necessarily. And so I always respond first with, thank you for telling me that. I'm so glad you did. And often that is like enough. I don't necessarily need to respond to the content right away unless you ask me to.
And one of the things that I've learned from this cycle, which is kind of amazing, is that it's two separate things. On the one hand, there's expressing the desire and having you receive it, or expressing the feeling and having you receive it. And on the other hand, there's the action, like what we're going to do or not do about it. And I can say, I just really want Italian tonight. And then we might or might not actually go to an Italian restaurant, but it's significant. It makes a big difference to have that spoken and received by you. And then with, your desire on the table and my desire on the table, we can have a discussion about what we're actually going to do. And that I'm not so attached anymore to having to do it the way that I was desiring it. It's a fun process.
Yeah. And so if I were to summarize, although you're very brilliant with summarizing, so let's have you do it also afterwards. But if I were to summarize, the thing that keeps a relationship spicy and alive, and just where I ask you about 25 years and does it get boring? And you look at me like, what are you talking about? To have that, it really is about cultivating uncompromising intimacy. In other words, cultivating the ability to be aware of how you feel and what you desire, and cultivating the ability to express it to your partner, and cultivating the ability to receive and hear that when your partner shares.
And the other aspect of it I would emphasize is being curious about myself. Like, okay, I feel sleepy. I feel uncomfortable. What's arising in me that is true, or that I'm feeling, or that I want to express? And also being curious about you. Like, what is new that's arising in you? Because it turns out that there always is new stuff arising, but it doesn't always come to the point of being expressed or visible unless it's invited.
Yeah. And I think you've shared, that you're feeling sleepy, things like that. And once you could share those comfortably, I really love that you started sharing when you're feeling horny, when you're feeling appreciative of me in one way or another. We're currently in a phase where you just look at me and I melt, because when that's what's inside you, you let that be expressed. And I'm really clear that you can do that because you've kind of cultivated the ability to express when things aren't so good either. And that just means we both have access to a bigger range of what's inside you.
And I don't want to minimize what you brought up in the first place, which is how someone listens and how someone receives what is shared, because building up a number of experiences of sharing something that was important to me and have it be accepted versus sharing something that was important to me and have it be criticized or rejected points the relationship in a totally different direction.
I feel like this is one of those conversations that could go on for hours, and I'd like it to, but in chunks. So, any final words for this episode, for this conversation?
To be continued.
Okay. And my final words are, if you have enjoyed this conversation, please get a copy of my book, Uncompromising Intimacy, or listen to it on Audible. I personally have recorded it, because that in Uncompromising Intimacy, I tell stories about our lives and I give you the recipe to create your own custom, unique version of this kind of relationship that you can enjoy with your partner.
Thank you for listening to the Intimate Marriage Podcast. For more information about Alexandra, her book, and her coaching services, go to theintimatemarriagepodcast.com.